Do you remember when the public were told that 35,000 children were estimated to move from private schools to state schools when you were being told about the VAT on private school fees? Well, what if in fact internal memos suggested that those numbers were a lot higher and that the public were not told this information? Would you think that that was dishonest of the government to tell you that? Well, this is what happens when cases go to court, because we have a thing called disclosure, where all the information, all the documents, anything that is either supportive of your case or goes against your case, you have to disclose in court. So that's what's happened here. There's an official memo internally that suggests, in fact, 54,000 children were estimated to move from the private sector to the state sector. And against those same estimates, that would mean that this whole policy makes no money at all. So welcome back to Black Belt Secrets. You've probably recognized that I'm somewhere else. I'm actually in China, but let's have a discussion about this because this is really serious. So this case going on in the High Court has revealed lots more information, and it seems that Treasury official memos estimated and advised the Chancellor of a number of things. One, that there was an estimated 54,000 children due to move within the first 2 years alone, and that alone on their own estimates would mean that they make zero money. Because on these estimates, if 10% of the children in the private sector moved, that would mean that the net revenue from this whole policy is zero. So they told the public a different figure, obviously, because they wanted the public to believe that actually this was going to make money. So they told the public something different. They told you that around 30 to 35,000 would move, and that was just an acceptable number, an acceptable collateral damage to the private sector. Not only that, they were also advised that this should be done at a later stage to avoid the disruption. And in fact, there was an estimate that moving this policy in January was going to be the maximum disruption to private education. And that's exactly what they did. Now, so many other policies have been forecasted to come in a year or 2 years, or even by the end of the Parliament, or even by the end of the second term, if they believe they'll get a second term. But why did this have to come in immediately, halfway through an academic year? In my personal view, that is because this is a spiteful policy. That's all it was ever intended to be, and judging on previous videos and memos and things that we've seen, it's my view that it is done deliberately to attack the private education sector. And I think that is disingenuous. I personally think that is dishonest if these figures are true, and that proves that this is very much a spiteful policy. So looking back at what they officially estimated to the public, they said that within the first year or so there'd be a few thousand, and then within the next couple of years up to 20,000, and long term they estimated a maximum of about 35,000 students. However, during the court hearings, they've estimated on this internal memo that actually about 54,000 children would be likely to move within the first 2 years alone. And that on their own estimation would mean that they make zero net revenue at the cost of the disruption of the education of all of these children. And it's not the only time that the Treasury and HMRC get things wrong. I have a number of examples, both in personal and professional life, where these things go badly wrong. And you might recall a video that I did on whether or not HMRC can just put their hand into your bank account and take the money if they believe you owe tax. Well, as it happens, just after I did that video, I had another personal example to tell you, which I'll tell you in just a moment. Don't go away. Just aside for a quick story, quite an alarming story actually. Yesterday I received an email from a company that had set up a new account in the name of a former employee of mine. Now, he hasn't worked for me for over 10 years, but what they'd done is they'd taken his details, used a generic company email address and set up an account, and then started emailing it, telling him that he's eligible for certain credit cards and things like that, which obviously raised alarm bells because they've got enough of his information to start setting up credit searches and things like that, which I thought was quite horrendous, given that this guy had not worked for me for over 10 years. But this was a genuine email from a genuine company, And I thought that's quite horrendous, that they've still got those details, even though he hasn't worked for me for over 10 years. And this is one of the things that happens with identity theft when these companies have your information because it's sold on again and again. And that is why I partner with a company on my channel called Incogni, because Incogni is a service that is set up specifically to target these data brokers and marketeers that collect all your information together and sell it on to other parties, like the one that sent this email yesterday, having set up an account in this guy's name. And I haven't even spoken to him for over 10 years now. But Incogni will request and require, using UK law and US law, that these companies remove your data from their servers. It works off an email address and your details, and they must remove your data from their servers, else they are in breach of law. And if they fail to remove that data after your request, then there is potentially a good claim against them. Incogni does all the work for you. You get access to a dashboard, and it gives you information on how many companies have confirmed that they've got your data and that they are removing it or in the process of removing it. You'll be alarmed as to how many companies have your data and confirm that they are removing it. If you did this yourself, even if you knew who to go to, it would take you hours, but Incogni does all of the work for you. And as a partner to my channel, you can get a great discount using the code BlackBeltSecrets with the link in the description below and on screen to get a 60% discount off the plan. And of course, a 30-day money-back guarantee. But when you see on the dashboard how many companies confirm that they've got your data and they're in the process of removing it, you'll be alarmed and relieved at the same time. So don't forget the code BlackBeltSecrets for a 60% discount. The link's in the description below. And just watch how many companies confirm it, because this was a very real story, quite an alarming story. This guy hasn't worked for me for over 10 years, and they're setting up accounts in his name, and it's coming to a generic email address because they obviously want to make sure that someone sees the email. Quite alarming, but check it out. Don't forget the discount code BlackBeltSecrets. The link's in the description, and you'll be relieved when you see how many companies remove your data. So back to my personal story. Now, I told you in my previous video that HMRC now are planning to reignite this originally conservative scheme of direct recovery if they believe you owe tax. Just a brief recap on that. So long as you have at least £5,000 across your accounts, you owe at least £1,000 in tax, their direct recovery scheme is that they can just take your money from your account and they don't need to do anything else for it, as against go to court for an order or a freezing order or a third-party debt order or any of those things, which I explained in my previous video. But also, they are now seeking direct information from banking institutions about you and your savings, where you've got your money saved and all of that sort of stuff. So they want all of this information. They want it directly. And so essentially they can spy on you. So they know what you have and where you have it. Now, my problem with them having the ability to just reach into your bank account and take the money is that they can, and they do, get things wrong. And I'll give you an example, because no sooner I published that video, we had our own example, because we had an email from our accountant to say that they'd received a letter from HMRC to say that they were going to charge us interest on unpaid tax. Now, this is not the only time this has happened. We didn't have any unpaid tax, just to make that clear, but this is not the only time this has happened. This has happened at least 2 or 3 times. You see, we are always quite efficient. We have multiple companies, and obviously we are self-assessed for tax and everything else, and we are very efficient with that. We pay things not just on time, but ahead of any deadlines, and we pay it all in full straight away. We are never late or anything like that. And more than a couple of times now, we've had HMRC misallocate, as in we've paid the tax, but they've allocated it to the wrong year. They've allocated it to the previous year on the assumption, their words, not mine, on the assumption that this was a late payment for the previous year, even though we'd already paid the previous year. So that didn't make sense anyway. But they assumed that it was a late payment. And so therefore they added penalties, at least on that occasion they added penalties and interest, all of which disappeared because they'd got it wrong. Now, just a day or 2 ago, they did exactly the same thing again. They added interest, they sent a letter, they said that it was going to charge us interest, and again, they'd misallocated the payment, they'd assumed that it was wrong. Just a quick conversation with the accountant cleared it up. Actually, it had been paid, there's nothing wrong with it, so they've cancelled the interest. But that's my problem with this. You see, if they believed that we'd not paid the tax, and therefore they levied interest against the tax that they believed that we hadn't paid, which was wrong because we had paid it. If they believed that that was unpaid and this direct recovery scheme is in force, and they just reach into the bank account and take the money, then they're taking the money when they are mistaken. Now, you might then say, well, if they can communicate and get all of the details and they know whether we have the savings and everything else, that doesn't stop them getting it wrong, because they had the payment from the previous year already. So this is without them getting additional information from the bank to say that there's savings in the account. That is without them having the ability to just take the money that they believe that they are owed mistakenly from the account, and the penalties and interest and anything else that they might then want to take as well. So very realistically, based on our own experience, just from a couple of days ago and from a couple of years ago, whenever it was, at least once or twice before, we've had this situation where they've believed that the money was not paid, and so they've sent us a notice that we were going to be fined and we were going to pay interest because they believed that we hadn't paid it when we had. So it's just flat out wrong. So they get these things wrong sometimes. And so my problem with them having that level of power is that they can just take the money and actually they are mistaken. But what if then that takes away all of the money that you've got to run your business, or if it's in your personal life and it makes you struggle financially and you have to go through lots of hoops to convince them that it was paid, it's a mistake, it's their mistake, they need to put it right. How is that fair? Well, it isn't fair. Frankly, as a lawyer, that's not fair. Whenever we go to court for an order to freeze money, or a charging order, which is to freeze property, or a third-party debt order, which is to order a bank to freeze money and then pay it over to a judgment creditor, we go through all of these steps and processes to convince the court that we've been through all the steps. We have to go through all these processes to convince the court that the person is not going to be left severely destitute because of this order. So that is my problem with HMRC having that level of power. So let me know what you think about that in the comment section below. Let me know what you think about the VAT on school fees below. And as always, thank you for watching.